to Hemali. She's going to start. I will chip in the middle, and then Hemali will take us to the finish line.
All right.
Over to you, Hemali.
Thank you, Prof. Thea.
Great.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Min, and thank you everyone who did put on your videos. It's just so nice to see faces, right? So before I share my screen, I just wanted to start by saying thank you for being here, and I hope this ends up being an engaging session, but a session that you feel like you walk away from. When Prof. Thea and I were thinking and doing some brainstorming around this masterclass, the one thing we said is that we want you to walk away from here feeling like you want to do some unlearning, relearning, and maybe some rethinking around assessment. And hopefully we can start that process through conversation, through sharing our reflections and lessons learned, but also drawing on from some of, the documentation that the institution has put together, and see how that can support the way in which we think about assessment, not only for purely fully online mode of delivery, but also thinking into the future for a more hybrid-based or blended approach to learning and teaching. So I'm going to switch my video off and share my screen at this point. If Prof. Thea, if you could just indicate when my screen is visible.
Yeah, I see it.
All right. Okay. And then I'm going to put us into, I'm just going to go into full presentation mode. So I am not able to see I won't be able to see any of the chat, so I won't be able to see any hands when they go up. So please feel free to ask questions as we go along. And Prof. Thea, I'll ask you to be my eyes in the room as I go through the presentation, and perhaps just stop me if there are any questions or lots of comments in the chat that are rising, so that we could tackle them and have a more informal conversation rather than wait to the end and take questions at the end, if that's okay.
Hemali, I'm going to ask Kirti to also help us, because
sure.
As you went to your full slide presentation, my chat function disappeared, but I can see hands that go up.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. So today's session is about reflection on assessment during remote learning, lessons learned, and tips for the future. But before we go into and actually start the session, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge and, realize that we are in a very uncertain, strange, and difficult time where some of you might be dealing with people who are unwell or have passed on. We've lost many colleagues at the University of Johannesburg this year when we just look at the circulars that come through. So I just want to take a moment to say that, we know that it might be very difficult for you to be in the session this morning and not be aware that there's so much going on around you. And we do take note of that, and we know that we are all in a difficult space right now, and we hope the class itself just takes away a little bit from that difficult time, and hopefully we can have a little bit of fun and engagement and think about assessment together. All right, so today's session is going to be structured in the following way. We're going to start off with reflections on the past year, about how we've moved to adjusted, transitioned in the context of a pandemic. What are the lessons that we've learned along the way? And we really want to share them with you. I'm going to share some of my overview and my reflections, but also share some of these lessons learned. And then Prof. Thea is going to then at that point also take over and share some of the lessons specifically from a technical aspect. And then we will go into the point 3, where we will really think about a way forward together, drawing on some of the guidelines and principles that already exist within the institution, but also hopefully at this point have a bit more of a conversation of where do you think assessment should go, and how would you ideally like to think about and assess within the current context or changing environment. And then lastly, have space and time available for questions and clarification. So this session is going to be very interactive. So I'm going to, at many points in the session, stop sharing my slides, and then we'll engage in an activity and come back to the slides. So before we jump into the reflections, I want to start with an activity straight away. So I'm going to, at this point, stop presenting. And then I'm going to share a link with you in the chat. And if colleagues, if you could please just click on the link, it will take you directly to a page. I will share my screen in a session. Okay, there we go. So you will go to a Padlet with a question, and I'm going to go to that Padlet as well so that I can. If you're having any challenges, please put up your hand at this stage or ask us any questions. All right, I'm just keeping an eye on any hands. Okay, is everyone still there? Okay, so once we get to this Padlet, I want us to engage with the question. So I'm going to just share my screen so everyone can see what we all should be seeing. If anyone could just engage, Prof. Thea, can you see it on your side, the Padlet?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. So the question that we're asking, in a few words, describe how you felt in adjusting to a process in a fully online mode. If you're struggling to think about it, or you haven't really taught, or you've just joined UJ, we want you to also, if you've been interacting or engaging online. For example, how did you feel when creating your online assessments during the June period? Or when you recently had to complete your performance management online. I mean, we had to all of a sudden do our performance management online. How did you feel? How did you experience it? So we're getting words coming through, and I'm going to just share them as they're coming through. Confused and frustrated, unsure, overwhelmed, anxious and overwhelmed, nervous, excited yet a little anxious, challenged, desperately concerned for my students, anxious and nervous, was relatively easy, but I lost sleep. Oh yes, tell me about losing sleep. Excited, a bit hesitant. I find online platforms fun, nervous about getting things right, keeping the quality good. Okay. Time, poor. Personally, I'm excited by these, but realize not all my students and staff would feel this way. That's actually true. And we all have different perspectives in terms of how we see and experience, this over the past year. It's been a roller coaster. Unsure. How are students going to cope? All right, I'm going to give maybe another minute to give everybody an opportunity to share some of these. Prof. Thea, at any point, if you want to come in and chip in, please feel free to. Dealing with plagiarism, planning around activity limited to the options on the screen. Okay, that's an interesting one. Missing eye contact. Yes, you know what I miss particularly around this time of the year as the weather gets warmer. And, when we go into spring and just have our first rains, and when UJ just blooms and you get those green leaves on the trees and you hear students' laughter, but clothing just goes from all these layers and jackets to sandals and dresses and bright colors. So I really miss that and think about that quite often. Full of uncertainties, stressed, very overwhelmed. So we're getting words like overwhelmed, anxious, uncertain. But then on the other side, we are also getting a few people that are saying, okay, it has been exciting. It's been a roller coaster. There are opportunities. Then a few voices also concerned about students. How are students going to cope? How are they going to feel? Okay, so I think we've got a sense of how people who have joined the session are sort of feeling. And it's really not very different from what our students have been saying. I see there are a few more coming up, so let me just give everyone an opportunity. Initially excited, but online everything is incredibly time consuming. It's absolutely true. I mean, I feel like the way in which we spend time working or being online has completely changed in the past year, over the past year. Did not know how many different types of assessments were available online. So also a learning experience. Excited and yet apprehensive. Okay, because I mean, they were uncertain and I think a little bit apprehensive also about the changes that are happening so quickly. Are the assessments authentic? Okay. Important question there. Time consuming, overwhelmed, burnt out. Okay, constantly anxious. Right, so I'm going to thank you for sharing all those thoughts. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and go back to my presentation, because I'd like to, even though our students are not with us, I would like to share some of the reflections that we've had with our students. So sort of, just go into, sorry about that, I should have shared from the, okay, so from your sense, we hearing that, okay, there's the anxious, the overwhelmed, you know, the past over the past you know, the 3-week period that we had our mid-year June exam sessions, Prof. Thea thought it was a good idea for us to connect with students because we felt very disconnected. So we teamed up from colleagues from PsycAD, ADC, as well as CAT, and we held daily hour-long sessions, you know, where students could join on it and sort of talk to us. And if they were not able to join at that time, we also shared 2 email addresses with them where they could email us and ask us any questions. And I just want to share some of the reflections that have come from those sessions. I took some of the chat, you know, the emotions and experience that were shared in the chat, and I just put them into a word cloud for us to get a sort of sense of what students were feeling, right? So we see words like isolation, uncertain, worrying, lonely, scary, loneliness, home life, fear, stressful, worry, boredom, missing, and all these words sort of highlighted what students were feeling. We had around over 200 students joining these sessions daily. Towards the end of the assessment period, they became fewer and fewer. And we also had groups of students that were repeating, that were just joining, even though we were having similar sessions daily. And we asked some of these students, like, why are you joining daily? Are you still feeling uncertain? Did we not answer your question? And they said to us, we like the fact that you're guiding us through the assessment period. We feel stressed and anxious, and we feel lonely, and we don't, you know, we like the fact that we're just here listening to you and you're guiding us through this process, which was an eye-opener for me, because sometimes when we're sitting so disconnected and away from each other, we forget how each other feels until we start engaging in some sort of conversation or opening a space for us to talk. Then we can really understand each other's experiences. So the feedback from our students could really be summarized as stress, frustrated. They felt like they were going to fail. They were sick, or they had family members that were sick. They felt not supported, alone.
Only 155 people.
And then,
colleagues, just mute your buttons, please.
Thank you. And then we looked at some of the questions that were asked. They were always around, you know, where do I find the timetable? They were not aware of the scope or where to find the scope, right? And we're not saying that this wasn't clearly communicated, but there was confusion that was created around this. They were unaware of the layout or where the exam was going to take place. So we would get questions and we would need to ask students to go back to their lecturers, speak to their tutors if they have tutors in the module. If they're mentors that are part of the module, reach out to them and find out for your subject. We also had to deal with, because UJ had 3 different approaches to the assessment period. We had the continuous assessment, where it was ongoing for the year. We had online exams, purely online exams, and then there were you know, provisions that were made by the institution, obviously taking the safety regulations and all of that into account, to have on-campus exams. And this was for particularly particularly the pracs and subjects that require the students to use certain material in order to complete the assessment. So students would then also ask us a lot of questions about what is continuous assessment? What does that mean? Does it mean I write the exam? I haven't heard anything from my lecturer. There was a lot of anxiety, and Prof. Thea also mentioned this in one of the reflections we had, is around they were very anxious about not having enough data. Will they have enough data to complete the exams? What if they run out of data during the exam? And then there were a lot of uncertainty about online invigilation. And although there were a lot of steps that were taken to support students did not understand, why we're using Proctorio and the Invigilator. How do you use it? And there were uncertainties around that. Unfortunately, we had people or experts from each area to sort of support and help answer these questions. But it also helped us where we sit, particularly in supports divisions. We're not always directly having conversations with students. We rely on conversations with colleagues. And it was really an opportunity for us to talk with students, to hear what their challenges are, and then think very carefully and critically in terms of what are we going to do before the next assessment cycle? How are we going to rethink some of the feedback that we got? And how will this better assist and support students through the exam period? Because the one question that I keep asking myself, can learning really take place when you're feeling very anxious and uncertain? Can you actively complete an assessment when you're feeling uncertain about being invigilated, or the way in which we are finding the assessment, or if there's no guidance or proper support in going fully online? So I bring it back to worldviews. How do we think about online, I think, is really critical here. And I lean a little bit here on Reingold's really, I think it's earlier ideas of how do we view online worlds, cyberspace, digital realms. Do we see it as separate? Is technology separate from us, or do we see it as an extension of ourselves? And I think this really helps in the way in which we frame, structure, think about design and assessment. Because when something is viewed as completely separate, the way in which we interact with the separateness or separation is completely different when we see it as an extension. And I mean, as an anthropologist, I've been really, really reflecting and thinking about, the way in which we've engaged with death in the past year, and the way in which ritual deaths, funeral ceremonies and funeral rites have been performed, and completely moved online. And in some cases, I mean, in families and close friend circles that we've heard about losses, when it comes to the discussion about funerals, family and friends have decided either not to have one, or to have it very small and private, or to have it online and accessible to as many people. And in that case, when the priest or whoever is performing the funeral rites is asked about certain rituals, in so many cases I've heard that rituals were just dropped. They were dropped because they were not seen as very necessary in certain cases. And this, brought me to think, what does that mean for the way in which we perform these funeral rites and ceremonies going forward? They've been so much a part of religion and culture, in the way in which we let the person that we've lost depart. And with that changing, what does it mean going forward? How are we going to change? Is it going to change the way in which we host funerals in the future completely? Or we have ceremonies around people that we've lost? And like funerals and death, assessment's part of the education system. Every system has assessment or a form of assessment. And we begin to ask ourselves, what does it mean now that we've gone from what we know traditionally and conventionally about how we assess students, and what has happened in the past year and a half or over a year. Did we just go online and take what we know and shift it online? Did we rethink it? Did we think the environment and help us see and let the worldview inform the way we design the assessment? And then at the end of it, is it still measuring the outcomes, and is it still doing it in a way where the learning is still happening? And those are some of the conversations that we want to continue to have with you a little later in the session. Before I go into the last part of my reflection, I just want to ask, are there any questions or any hands so far? Okay. Any questions, hands? I'm assuming not.
No, there aren't any hands.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Kibi. All right, so the way in which I really reflected on and spoken to colleagues and, some of the students that I've supervised about, how do you see all of this that we've been through? And I bring some of these reflections back to the way in which we see assessment. And it's really, for me, it's about time and space, right? Before, we would have students coming to a venue at a particular time for a particular duration. There would be papers that would be handed out, or it would take place as a multiple choice exam in a lab. There was structure. Then the space was linked to that. It would be the 4 walls or a venue. It would be at one of our 4 campuses. Students know where to go, what is the time. There's a timetable to help that. With the online, this has become slightly blurred, because we have students at any time, anywhere, logging on and participating. It's flexible in the sense that with some conversations that I've had with colleagues, students have a 24-hour, 48-hour period to take the exam, so they know they're not necessarily taking the assessment at the same time. So there's been flexibility that has been sort of applied to assessment and doing assessment, or a window period opened up for various reasons. And a lot of the reasons had to do with, the potential or possibility of ESCOM and load shedding, of students connecting from remote spaces and places, and needing to go to a place where they had steady Wi-Fi connectivity in order to participate. So having one set time would make that very difficult. So opening up time in a way that was more flexible enabled access and participation for all of our students. And we were fully online. So in terms of anytime, anywhere, and flexible, this all was created within the online context. And then space as well, anywhere, no walls, different context, and boundless. And I think the different context should really be highlighted here, because in conversations with students, especially at the beginning of lockdown, students in the initial part would tell us that, we expected to do chores now that we're at home. We have to babysit, or we have to help our grandparents. And there were a whole lot of other responsibilities that they were expected to participate in over and above their learning. So it was very difficult for students to attend or be participating in online classes when they were happening. And often, if they were recorded, they would log on. And what we saw from some of the online modules that we had for both CAT and within ADC, students would particularly log on after 12. And there were various reasons for it. Maybe they had the time then to participate in the space, to just focus on their learning, but also that they were dependent on maybe the night owl data, or they were using the night owl data to do their learning. So for us, time and space really should help inform the way in which we think about assessment and, moving forward. And what does it mean when we come to hybrid? Because one of the big lessons from the first year seminar that we've hosted this year is that the online is very valuable. The online has potential to be very socially just because students are not being left behind. They have that space to return to and go to if the backbone of everything that we do lies online, but there's potential then for that face-to-face to take place. Okay, so we are going to have a 3-minute breakout room. Once you're in the breakout room, you're going to have a facilitator come in. The idea is to be quick. We want to have a quick online chat. You will get like instructions in 10 seconds, and then we'll take it from there. I don't know, Megan or Angie, I know I got an email this morning from you about the breakout. Should we give it a shot and see if it works?
Inga, you can start the breakout rooms.
Thank you very much.
Someone's having chips.
Oh, it sounds like salt and vinegar. I'm trying to find that person.
Okay, are we all back?
No, Hemali?
Yes.
It seems that a bulk of us were not able to be allocated to a breakout room.
Oh, okay. All right, that's fine. We'll sort of pull you into the discussion in a bit.
No problem.
Okay. All right. Megan, will you just let me know when they're all back? I didn't take note of. Sure, thank you. Shahid, I see your hand is up. Okay,
we went into the breakout room, and we waited for a facilitator, and 3 minutes later we're back and nothing.
Oh gosh, did the facilitator not arrive? Oh my goodness.
No.
Oh no, okay, because I was also in a breakout room and my allocated facilitator didn't arrive as well. So hopefully there's some groups that did manage to. As soon as we get to the activity around this, I think we'll, engage a little bit around what happened, or get some conversation going with those of you that had an opportunity to talk. I see there's a hand up, Oro Bindo. I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly.
Yes, correct. Thank you. Same is the case with me. I didn't see any link for a breakout, which room to join, or maybe I was not aware about things, whether it is being facilitated at your site or we have.
All right. Thank you so much, Aurobindo. I'm sorry to hear that there's so much. Amu Baloy, I'm assuming it's the same challenge or?
Same. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So let's just pause there. I'm going to go straight into the next session, and then in the activity, let's try and see whoever was able to have a conversation and had the facilitator directing them. We'll talk through that in a moment, right? So I'm going to go back to sharing. Am I sharing my slides? There we go. Okay, I stopped sharing it. I was actually sharing it. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. So I think, okay, you can see them. Let's go to, there we go. All right, so we went into a 3-minute breakout room. For some of you, the facilitator would have arrived and you would have had some of the instructions. But before we get to the activity around that, I just want to quickly go to the next section where we talk about the lessons learned for us, because and I will hand over to Prof. Thea after we do the activity, but I really want to give some of the lessons that I've learned through the reflections and through the experiences in the past, over the past year, and sort of then hopefully create some space for us to have conversation around what that way forward is a little bit later in the presentation. So the lessons learned, I'm just summing it up into 3 parts. The importance of presence, communication, structure, and in structure I'm including design, because what we're hearing from you in terms of some of your what you've shared on Padlet, some of what our students have said, some of the conversations that we've had with each other, was really the importance of having someone guide you through it. I mean, I think about the performance management process that we've went on, and there've been so much of support. But when you actually do the performance management online, you feel anxious and you feel a little bit alone, even though there's been a lot of guidance from HR and all the workshops around it. So how do we create that presence? And how do we communicate in a way that is clear and sort of reinforces those messages? And I think when we spoke to some of the students, particularly around the exam times, and since we're focusing on assessment here, in that communication, what is important? I think it's more than just the instructions. For me personally, I think it's that reassurance, that care, the importance that they being supported, that they know there will be a presence or somebody available. Do students know that if they're having connectivity issues, was there an email address or was there somebody that they could contact in those challenging times? And after a week of having those online sessions, we were getting emails sent to us via our UJ Cares email address asking us to please contact the lecturer and let them know that they can't log on. And it wasn't a lot of queries, but there were a handful that were coming through directly to us. And then lastly, the importance of structure, and how do we create structure when time and spaces change? Before, time and space would create the structure for us in our physical spaces, and you know, when we physically would be there in time. But now that it is boundless, that there is you know, so much flexibility, how is that structure created, and does that structure enable us to remain agile and also remain flexible, so that no student is being left behind, so that we continue learning and teaching in a way that supports everyone in their varied spaces and places? Okay, so the activity we're going to go to now is a Padlet linked to the oh, sorry. Just gonna copy the link and share it in the chat. Stop sharing. I think I have to stop sharing.
Yeah, Hemali, while you do that, I see there's a hand up. I can't see whose hand.
Okay.
If you have your hand up, do you have a question?
The hand is Amu Paloi.
Okay, it's
just an early, yeah.
Okay, sure.
Okay, to someone from earlier. Okay, so sorry, colleagues, thank you for bearing with me. I am gonna paste the link into the chat, and if you could please go to our Padlet that, and I'm going to share my screen in a moment, which is asking about, in a few words, tell us your experience during the breakout rooms. I think with colleagues that did not have a facilitator or, you know, had challenges, please tell us what you felt like in that 3 minutes, because I was, even though we organizing the session, I was in a session where there wasn't a facilitator and no one spoke. There was 3 minutes of awkward silence. So I'm just wondering, I mean, was that the same experience in your group? Was they reaching out and trying? I saw all the chats going that, you know, we're just waiting here, we left behind. So, okay, so words, they're popping up. Alone and anxious. I'm going to share my screen so everybody can see what I'm seeing. Okay, so we had, you're feeling alone, anxious, uncertain. Colleagues did break the silence. Okay, I'm glad in your group that the silence was broken. Lost, confused. I was not in the breakout room and felt excluded. Oh gosh. Okay, so it sounds like there were a lot of, I'm not getting any of the stuff. So did anyone have a conversation about the exams? Left out? If you could share your thoughts, because this is uncertain, confused, lost. Okay. No facilitator, asking around who could inform, wanted to get going. Oh, no. Okay, anyone that had a conversation that remained in the main room? Just wondering what next. Okay, I'm going to just give it maybe another minute or so and see if there is anything that's linked to what's going to take us into the next session. No conversations took place. No one spoke. I suppose it's that first-hand experience of confusion that some students might have experienced. Okay, so I guess many of you have figured it out. You were meant to feel confused and excluded and left out and uncertain. And I think the whole aim of our breakout room session is to let us experience firsthand what our students feel when there isn't a presence, when there isn't communication, and when there isn't any structure created. What do they expect? They expect someone to come and guide them, you know, and then you've got to I mean, what we have right now is that there's no high stakes exam taking place, you know, or there's no examination that our sort of career path depends on. We could just come back to the space and reflect on it and discuss it. But this is what our students have sort of expressed during some of the sessions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I think we can see that everyone, and I'm Shahid and Aurobindo and who was the other person? I'm just gonna look in the see if they, I think your hand below, it was below. Kenneth, Amu, you put your hands up. I felt terrible being in one of the breakout rooms and not being able to say anything and experiencing the silence myself because it was awkward. But I just want to get a moment here, give us maybe a few minutes for us if you want to raise your hand and really think about, does this sort of push us to think about how do we go about planning online assessments? How will we change? Did we incorporate some of this when we were planning? If you did, it would be wonderful for you to share your creative ways in which you manage to create the presence, communicate, as well as create the structure for students in your respective courses during the previous exam period. So I'm going to give us a moment here to share a little bit. Anyone that wants to go, raise your hand, share any insights. Yeah, I agree. Silence is always golden. Prof. Shahid.
Thank you. I think I went for the synchronous as well as the asynchronous route. So the synchronous definitely had the positive effect of having the presence. I think that is a must do, because we become so or apart from the students, and it's something they want because they're also sitting potentially in their own little spaces at home, and they need that physical, more tangible experience, if you want to call it that. I think luckily in health sciences we do have the practicals where they come in contact with us as well, which does assist. So, for me the synchronous definitely worked. But to mitigate any challenges that were alluded to previously, those synchronized lectures were recorded so that students could firstly, if they did miss the session, view it at their leisure, but also if they wanted to revise. So the asynchronous recordings were also then utilized for the dual purpose of revision if students missed out on something. And I followed this up with the collaborate session where there was the more interactive. So it was almost like an online tutorial, once again, live streamed, so students could participate and interact with myself. And more importantly, interact with each other. I think this is something we need to factor in. The peer interaction also has value. So it doesn't become just a modified sage on the stage, but it needs to be an interactivity in a particular session, which will add great value. That's what was my experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I think that really also, I mean, in health sciences, also with the first year seminar, that's something that came across really strongly in some of our reflections that we had with health sciences, is that they had sort of a blended model. They had the online, but they had some of that face-to-face, and that really changed the way in which students experience first year seminar. And I think in terms of what you're describing, the asynchronous and synchronous, also talks to that way forward. What happens when we return? Do we just go back to what we know, or do we take the lessons that we've learned from these experience and sort of apply it? And I know in health sciences you're already sort of doing that and preparing for that in your current experiences. Thank you very much for sharing that. Then in the chat, I am thank you for your comments, and yeah, the crisps were definitely not intentional, but yeah. Part of this workshop nonetheless. Okay, so we have Jacqueline says, plan for the unexpected and front load information, always valuable, communicating ahead of time so the students know, but also planning for the unexpected. You really need to think before the unexpected was the student won't arrive. Now the unexpected is that students will not be able to log on. There'll be some sort of hiccup, a glitch, data, connectivity, so many unexpecteds. So how do we plan for that? Then Yvette, we pre-released a 2-page document setting out how assessments will run. We wrote Synchronize. Yvette, if you don't mind, if you could just elaborate either in the chat or if you're open to unmuting yourself. When you say we wrote in a synchronized way, could you maybe just tell us a little bit how that worked?
Yeah, sure. So I'm from the Department of Accounting, and the students got the assessments like they would a normal assessment and then rote timed. So we would send them the assessments in both Word and PDF. We would pre-release a password protected version so they could download, but then they had to write from like 9 to 12 on the day, for example. And then we would also release a document that wasn't password protected at 9 on the day that they write. And then they had to upload a scanned written paper when they were done. So we kind of ran it like normal assessments, except they weren't in a venue.
All right. Okay. Interesting. And it worked fine. I mean, did you have a lot of challenges, or it worked pretty okay?
So it worked fine, except when the students have to upload at the end. I think our biggest challenge is that in spite of being a year and a half into online, students still struggle to scan and upload documents. Which is something that we wouldn't, and I teach at a third year level, so you would have thought a third year student would have had this jack by now.
Yeah.
And then also we had to allow for multiple platforms for submission, which creates a big administrative burden on the lecturers. Because in case Blackboard is down, you want to have an email backup. But in case a student has data issues, you want to have a WhatsApp backup. And then it becomes, it almost, I don't know, spirals out of control in terms of where all the submissions are coming from.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I think that's really nice just to know how it worked in practice and to see what the learnings from there. But it sounds like there was a lot of planning that went into this. From the sounds of it, there was a WhatsApp group, and there was a lot of planning and support in place. And I think that communication and presence and structure was really created in your case. Before I take Aurobindo's hand, yes.
Oh, okay. You can see the hands. Eh?
Yes, I can see the hands. Thank you. Before I take Aurobindo's hands, I saw Jackie's comment first before I saw the hands. So always allow for grace if things do not work out. It is part of learning, and use it as a teaching moment, which I think is a wise word spoken. Very important to take everything as a learning experience and just not beat us up for these little challenges and the parts where we fall over, and use the what do we call it, failing forward. I know EduCaUSE uses that term of failing forward and how it takes us to learn from these experiences. Aurobindo, over to you.
Thank you very much for giving this platform to share some experiences. I have very interesting experience to share. First of all, personally, I did not feel much challenge during this lockdown when it came to the platform, shifting to the platform, online platform, because we have been doing this, UJ has been doing this online platform. We were digitally present as compared to many universities, and students have been on the online platform. What actually changed during this lockdown period was the format, was the extent to which students were expecting or we were trying to deliver. And that was actually a borderline between the normal practice and the way things were required to be innovated and delivered to the students. That's what changed. And I think I found it very interesting on number of reasons. First thing, the platform and the accessibility UJ had provided was excellent in terms of infrastructure or data and other things. At the same time, I would say students were also exploring number of things, whether it was Microsoft Teams, Blackboard and other platforms, and they were expecting a lot. And in between this, the lecturer's role was to balance something which is more comfortable. And I agree with Jacqueline, where she mentioned, like in terms of we had to be mindful of certain grace and other things. So for me, it was very interesting, but it was more on challenging in terms of providing to the next level the way we have been doing. And I have several experiences to share maybe next time. And for example, personally, I made a video, and now we were the script writers, we were the directors, we were the video shoot producers as well, and cutting a video. But when we compare it to international standards and the quality and other thing, I think there is where we need some support here and there, because of what we see the standard quality elsewhere, and things work out. And some things are very time consuming. It will take a lot of time in reaching to that level in which we would like to deliver. So personally, I think it was very smooth transition. Students adapted it very well, and we have further scope to in terms of improvise and deliver. And it was fantastic experience for me, although there were challenges, but it also gives up more room to innovate in a way the way it is. And many students were not, for example, adapting well because of various challenges, we understand. But now, for example, in this year, I am being very strict with the students, specifically this semester. They know the rules of the game now, and I think they need to also jump to that level. Infrastructure data is not an excuse. Everything is there. It's the ability of a student to respond to and be more disciplined towards this blended mode of learning now. It has advantages, number of advantages, definitely.
Thank you so much, Aurobindo. I think those are very nice reflections, especially with the part where you spoke about, the comfort of using it, but it's about, reassessing our role in terms of how we center ourselves, center our students. So it doesn't remain like Prof. Shahid said, the sage and the stage. It becomes this interactive, a space with care and like Jackie said, grace and so forth. Okay, so we're gonna, I'm gonna stop there. There are a few comments in the chat. There's no questions, but there are colleagues that are sharing experiences about how they've used the tools or how they've set up. So thank you, Dustin, Mary, Nadira, for sharing your thoughts. Colleagues, please have a look at that. And I'm going to move on now by asking you to quickly participate in a poll. So I'm going to copy and paste the link. But there is so once you go to the link, there is a password that you will need a number that you will need to put in. So I'm going to also share the number that you're going to have to put in order to go to the poll. Okay. See, beforehand, there is a question to Nadira. What do you mean by e-sheets? Nadira, if you could just explain that for Mary. Okay, so if you click on the link, it will take you to a poll. You have to answer yes or no to the question, and you will be asked to put in a number in order to access the poll. So I have pasted that into the chat as well. It's 37361247. I'm going to quickly share my screen and open the poll on my side so we can see what's happening. The question is, do we need live online invigilation? Let me share my screen so we can see what's happening in terms of the poll. Okay. So as you finish it, do we need live online invigilation? When I opened it, it was at 50-50. Now it's at 74% yes, 26% no. It's changing as we go along, as more people do it. We're still waiting. If you're struggling, please let us know. Click on the link that I pasted into the chat, and then there is a number that you will need to type in to the bar in order to access the poll. So the number...
Hemali, yes. People need to copy the number and then click on the link.
So they can copy it and paste it into they need to first click on the link. The link will take you to a page with a bar that allows you to put the number in. So first click on the link, then copy and paste the number into the bar that's provided. Just trying to see. There are 51 people that have done it, and I think we have over 100 people in the room. So I'm going to give us Okay, there we go. More people are getting into it. So let's see, 58, 59, but we still, it's not changing our bars that much. We still have majority of people saying, yes, we do need live online invigilation. Let's wait for a few more. Okay, Prof. Thea, I think we can safely say that majority are saying yes.
Yes.
Are you happy for me to hand over to you to take over?
Yes, I'm going to share my screen now.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you, colleagues, for taking the poll with us. I'm handing over to Prof. Thea now.
Thanks, Hemali.
Okay, colleagues, the question is, do we need live online invigilation for all assessments? Yes, of course, we're really worried about the integrity of our qualifications. And that's, I think, the most important thing for UJ. You know, we have such a reputational risk when our students manage to cheat and then spread the news all over TikTok. We recently had a problem with a big class, over 1,000 students, and they had to all rewrite. And I think we learned a lot of lessons out of that case because of the reasons that students managed to cheat. You know, not all students cheat. And I think that is the point of view that we need to take as our point of departure. But when there's opportunity, some do. In self-reports in the States, cheating during assessments point to similar cheating behavior face-to-face and online. And I think that's an important thing. You know, we all just anecdotally say, oh, now that we're online, it's just like they're all now cheating. But actually, there's, and there are other studies too, besides this one that I'm quoting here, that actually talks about that. When there's opportunity to cheat, they will cheat face-to-face or online. Last year, at the end of last year, Kirti had an interesting conversation with all of the faculties and CBE about the issues that emerged. One of the things we need to really take into consideration, and this was the problem with this big class also, when you allow too much time for students to complete their assessments, it's very easy for them to share their answers, talk to other students and ask for help. I think a big issue that we found in CAT is inappropriate settings. And I really want to encourage people to contact your CAT ID so that you just make sure that you use Blackboard and the assessment settings optimally. You know, it is about the numbers of attempts, where you set it for forced completion, whether you prohibit backtracking, where you give them all questions on one at a time or all at once. You give them feedback and so on. Questions are often limited or not randomized or scrambled, and that's really an issue. Obviously, plagiarism was an issue. The browser not locked, and particularly for stats and mathematics, students then quickly visited websites. They also, of course, use WhatsApp to get the answers and share it. And we also had here and there an issue where we're not sure if a student were the student that was supposed to write the exam or if somebody else wrote the exam on their behalf. And I think these lessons that we learned from that conversation is really something to keep in mind. And I want to link with what Hemali has been doing. We really need to think about, how are we assessing? Why do we assessing? What do we assess? And overall, good design is critical. Online invigilation is really your second line of defense. Good design and effective use of the learning management system is always the first line of defense. There's no replacement for good pedagogy. Obviously, different disciplines need different solutions for assessments, and I'm really cautioning us against the one-size-fits-all. We cannot now just force everybody to have an online invigilation system or a proctoring system where all of their students are invigilated in the same way. We need to create bigger pools of questions and randomize them. We've had problems in the last exam where pools were not big enough, or where there was a very big pool and then people split the big pool into small little chunks. In other words, if you have 200 questions and then you divide it into 20s or 25s, then students will really be able to cheat. Some people allocated really too much time. So you need to figure out how much time do you need to give students so that they can actually get all the technical things sorted out, and how much time do they really need to complete the assessment. One of the things that my colleagues in CAT did very well was to create little test sites where students who used Proctorio could try out Proctorio and just make sure that they're familiar with it. That was the one system we used, or the invigilator, and they could practice ahead of time. Now, one of the things we really need to think about is how do we create a culture of integrity? And there are many ways to do that. Of course, we all have to explain the purpose of assessments. Students need to know that if they're a bunch of cheaters, their degrees will be worth absolutely nothing. We need to remind students, but we also need to consider creating honor codes in our classes, in our modules with our students that we work with over a semester or a year. And it's very interesting, research is pointing out that when students agree to be honest before every assessment, it seems to prevent some of them from cheating. We will share all of our slides with you. We have a lot of guidelines. Remember, there's the Blackboard toolkit. It's on Blackboard that you can get all kinds of help. You have your IDs, and then we also have these different documents that we're quite happy to share with you. And colleagues across UJ contributed to this. So for high stakes assessments, we really need to think about how we are going to assess. And somebody said we need to think, what are we assessing and what type of solution do we need? So we don't always need live assessment. Turnitin is very helpful for take-home exams, the essay type of exams, and so on. Then we used Proctorio. About 1,500 students used it in the June exams. That is really very serious invigilation, where you have to have your video on and AI flags potential transgressions. We have not been using the 360 room scan or live people watching students. We've had 2 petitions where students wanted us to not use live invigilation, and we also had a long session, in fact more than one session, with the SRC. And I think students need to understand what we are doing and how careful we are about not exposing their private spaces and not selling their data. Many of them thought Proctorio will sell their data in the background. But most of our students actually use the invigilator. Some students use Lockdown Browser. You're all familiar with that, particularly when we write on campus in the computer labs. So almost 9,000 students use the invigilator. And what we will do in the next Senate Teaching and Learning Committee is we're going to ask the folks from the invigilator to give us a quick 10-minute rundown on why invigilator that is not very intrusive is actually, in spite of the fact that it's not watching you with a video, it can hear you, actually is very good to mitigate online assessment risks. The invigilator is mostly a cell phone app, but it works, and it works on any entry-level smartphone. So that sorts out the problem we've had with students who, for whatever reason, did not take up the opportunity to ask for a device from us. But Invigilator also works on any Windows 10 type of device, any notebook, laptop, desktop, and so on. I'm going to share the details with you when it's here at the bottom. And then I want to quickly have 2 more slides. The one is there are really limitations of live online invigilation. You know, it's the device issue, it's the stable internet connection, adequate data, electricity, and so on. However, students with disabilities really require special invigilation solutions. And my colleagues at PsyCAD and Layla was very, very good at contacting all of the students individually. And I really commend them for that. A big shout out for Layla Kafur and her colleagues on how they handle students with disabilities. Research indicates that some students perform really worse when you have live invigilation, particularly when they think someone is watching them, even if it's just like quote unquote a robot. We get often false positive transgressions. There's some studies in the United States that was linked to darker facial complexions and atypical body movements. It depends how quote unquote finely tuned your online system is set. The way that UJ is doing it is every transgression needs to be personally looked at by the lecturer. So we're not getting people outside UJ to look at it, and we're not getting a robot to tell us the student really cheated. Students really are very concerned about their privacy, and interesting with the SRC and with the students in the petitions, they don't want people to see what their rooms look like. And that is one of the reasons why we don't do a room scan. It's important to train and appoint specialists to adjudicate. And we need to give students an opportunity to appeal. I've had recent questions about the invigilator. If 2 students right in the same room and one makes noise, will the invigilator app that records you and noise immediately think you were a cheater? But Yuri Vessels will explain to us, and we will share that video with you, that it's not so simplistic. You really can hear very clearly when it's just like dogs barking, someone eating like the chips person, someone just making noise, or someone asking very loudly for help, which happens more frequent than you would think. Okay, back to you, Hemali, and I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so that we can.
I'm gonna, Prof, before I take over again, there are a few comments in the chat. So I'm going to read them because I don't know if you're going to know where to start and where to stop. So I'll read them for you. And then I don't know if we want to take a few minutes for any questions or comments or anything. All right. So Shahid said assessment mindset change required to the modality for assessment does not have to be traditional sit down and write. However, the nature of the module offered does guide as to the modality used, can be used. I think that's a very valuable comment in terms of, you know, how flexible are we, and yeah, disciplinary needs are different. And I think that goes back to your one size fits all comment, Prof. You know, that we can't have a one size fits all comment, and we need to listen to the needs of faculties, the college, disciplinary subject, and so forth. Then Jackie said social values of behavior are reflected in our own modules. The lack of integrity of our politicians, etc., will be find the expression of our modules in the form of cheating. We can put measures in place to minimize. However, difficult to eradicate, must have values based on conversation with students. Yeah, also I think a very valuable point, and I think links back to some of your earlier comments, Jackie, in terms of how we do and how we, you know, sort of emulate some of this stuff in our classroom and in our spaces, or should I not say the classroom, and I don't know what to call it anymore, but the spaces of engagement. Then we have a question from Maisa. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is it possible to have pools of questions with different mark values? I find that when I use a pool of questions that are randomized, all questions have to have the same mark value. This makes using pool incredibly difficult and massively time consuming. I don't know if somebody can help us, Prof, if you have the answer to that question. Colleagues that have tried it, tested it, if it's possible on Blackboard.
Let me just ask Arno. Arno is here.
Kenneth's hand is up.
I know you have the answer, Kenneth. Go for it.
Thanks, Kenneth.
Thank you, Prof. I think that's a very interesting question, and it's frustrating for many colleagues. So one way of working around that is to group your questions. So your question types, all your multiple choice questions that are worth the same point, put them in a group of their own, like create a pool of questions that are multiple choice with the same questions. And then you do the same with another type of questions that do not necessarily have the same point. And then when you build your pool now, you can select how many questions should your test take from each of the differentiated types of questions and their points as well, which will then give you the total of all the total marks that are available. So it's just a matter of differentiating them by question type or by the number of marks that you are allocating. And then when you build your pool, select from each of those subgroups that you've created.
Thanks, Kenneth.
That's one way of handling it, but there must be another way.
Arno, let me quickly just hear what you say.
Okay, thank you very much. Good day, everybody. The big thing is if you use Bloom's taxonomy in your assessments, you can set up the pools or the different questions so that they count the same marks, but you've got a heap of questions to choose from. So the best way in an LMS such as Blackboard is to use to categorize your questions. Blackboard has got that option when you set up the question to give it a specific level. And those levels directly refers to Bloom's taxonomy. So your basic questions can go into a specific pool with a category, and so the questions advance. So when you set up the test and you do a random block, you might have, let's say, a question value or a percentage value of the whole exam or whole assessment, like 20% for remembering facts. And number two, for applying facts might be 10%. So you take those, you select your questions at random from the different pools, and the system will do it randomly. So your levels will be perfectly set inside a pool. The random blocks in Blackboard then selects different questions, although they count the same marks. They're on different levels and they enhance your level, your Bloom's levels inside a paper.
Thank you, Arno. Tabang, I see your hand is up.
Good morning. Thank you. I agree with the previous speaker about using the pools, but mine is regarding doing questions that involve calculations. For example, if you are from science, I'm from engineering myself, it's very difficult on Blackboard because you can't do a follow-up question based on calculation that will use the previous answer, for example, for a student. So I think Blackboard needs to be improved because it's really a challenge. You end up giving the entire class the same question because when you make it random, then it's difficult to do a follow-up question that uses the previous answer. There's no link or syncing of different questions on Blackboard. It's my challenge.
Tabang, that is a very interesting observation, and I'm actually going to ask my CAT ID colleagues to think about that. Arno, maybe to come up with a specific solution for them. I hear exactly what they are saying. Tabang, thanks for that contribution. Anybody else? Okay, Hemali, over to you.
I'm gonna just finish reading some.
There is one.
Oh, there is.
Davi.
Sorry.
Thank you, Thea. I would just like to reflect on something that I experimented with, and that is the Safe Assign tool on Blackboard. I previously was really disappointed, and I'm talking about two groups of classes, third year law of evidence students, and then I've got forensic investigators. And what was quite disappointing is that fraud investigators committing fraud, as I put it to them, because it was copying from each other that you couldn't believe it. So my first experiment was to use Safe Assign to get the specifics from Safe Assign, the names, etc., where, and I can't say whether A copied from B or B copied from A, but that's not important. And then I got the percentages on the similarity report. And I specifically did not use the setting that they should be warned. And with my forensic investigators last week, I decided that I am going to contact them and say, listen, I'm going to give you an extra week for your assignment. You still have 2 more attempts. And then I open up so that they can see that there was 100% similarity report, and they can even see, you know, the students that Safe Assign compared it with. And now I've just this morning realized that it dropped from some of them from 100%, attempt number 2 is 8%. And I said that I'm only going to mark the last attempt. So there were about 30 students so far that used this opportunity. And I think I didn't threaten them, but I warned them explicitly that this is not going to be tolerated because of the copying, even mistakes being copied exactly the same. They use the same, and my LLB students use the same, and I think they Googled it. They use the same websites from firms of attorneys and copy those. And it wasn't even related to the question. That is how ridiculous it was. Thank you, Thea.
Thanks, Darby. Thanks for your contribution. And colleagues, you all know that we have Safe Assign as part of Blackboard, and it's like a basic tool that you can use to check on similarities of text. And Darby, that's actually a quite clever way of using it. There is a hand up from Dingy. Masakale, Dingy, over to you.
Yeah, I just want to ask concerning
Dingy, just come closer to your mic. We struggle to hear you.
Can you hear me now? I'm myself.
Let's see if we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm talking, but I don't know why. Can you hear me? But I'm using my cell phone.
Okay, just go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, mainly concerning the issue of registration, because what I can pick up from Ontario and invigilator, one more cell phone based, and then the other one is more, I presume, more laptop and maybe but I just want to get from the guys who have used it. Do you really communicate to students that they need to, for example, a cell phone? Or, you know, that it's, if for example, I use investigation on cell phone based, then it's two students who are using the laptop. How is it practical? Because I've been trying to have about 800 students on my 2 other courses. Just need to start implementing it. So I just wanted to know how to implement it, how it is practical.
Dingy, we struggle to hear you, but I don't know if Hemali, did you get the question or the comment?
Not fully. So Dingy just
Dingy,
yeah.
I'm going to ask him to also just to type
it in the chat.
Type the gist of what you ask in the chat function. We struggle to hear you. Is there, and then we will get back to your to answering you a little bit later. Hilda. Hilda, over to you.
Just unmute yourself.
Sorry, Prof, I had forgotten to unmute me. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Hilda.
I just wanted to add on to what David said regarding plagiarism. So what we did, because we also have an issue with that, I had 2 workshops with facilitators from the Writing Center for my students, but still more they continued to plagiarize to an extent where a few of them even exchanged the exact same assignment. And as David said, with all the mistakes and everything, and at the end, you probably give them a 0 or something. So I'm trying to find out from colleagues, what way can we try and mitigate this? I saw a suggestion in the comments, which was quite nice, saying that perhaps we could give students smaller chunks of assignments rather than a large assignment with a lot of marks. Thanks.
Thank you, Hilda. You know, Kirti, unless you've already had it, we probably should have an entire masterclass talking about plagiarism again. And we need to have a look at the numbers of students that are now paying to get the assignments done or buying assignments. But I think that's a separate conversation. Hilda, there's a lot done on how you can set assignments to try and avoid plagiarism as much as possible. And I'm going to leave that answer to colleagues such as Jackie. I don't know if you want to comment, Jackie, but I do think Hilda is absolutely right. It is a really big problem, and you struggle to get that rooted out depending on the types of assignments you set for students. Jackie, do you quickly want to comment on that?
Thea, before I do, I see Hilda's hand is up. Maybe she just wants to jump in first.
No, no, sorry.
No, we just gave her an opportunity.
Yeah.
It's an old hand. All right. Thea, I don't know where you headed with this conversation, but I just want to pick up something that David mentioned earlier in the terms, I think we tend to use soft terms to describe what is actually happening when students are cheating and copying things. Use words such as overlap, plagiarism. They don't really have a full understanding of the fact that they're compromising the integrity of their system and putting their qualification at risk. And maybe it is important that we're having that conversation, and use such words such as fraudulent activity. It's theft. It is, so I think, I think the narrative needs to be addressed to amplify the gravity of the activity of when you are engaging in fraudulent activity in terms of copying and pasting and, using without permission, etc. So, just redirect me if I'm not addressing your specific query.
Yeah. Hilda, I think I'm going to suggest that we have, because this is like a whole separate conversation, and Mary is right that students do, quote unquote, get around, turn it in. The problem with turn it in and all of these kinds of software tools is that they're just basically robots, and they use artificial intelligence. So there's a lot of work for you, the lecturer, involved in this. And I do think we need to have a separate conversation about it. Kirti, have you had a session on plagiarism?
Yeah, Kirti just stepped out.
Yes.
Megan, have we had a session on plagiarism specifically?
Tia, it's Kibby.
Yes.
No, we haven't had a specific session on plagiarism, and I think Megan and Angie and I will arrange a session on plagiarism to follow this one as well. Yeah.
And thank you, Kibi. I think we need to do it, and then we need to have a conversation of the balance using technology and the way that and pedagogy and the integration of the two.
Yeah. Tia, can I just jump in here quickly?
Yes.
I think there's a balance. Technology, any activity that is mediated through technology, whether it is a tool where we try to catch them out in wrongdoing, etc. Students will always be a step ahead. There's always a solution, a workaround solution. for students, where they cheat, they turn it into, etc. There are, I mean, if you just Google it, there's lots of different ways that you can subvert a technological solution in that sense. So I think we need to turn our minds back to the way that you are setting your assessments, what you're asking, the highly contextual nature of the assessments. Then it is more difficult then to actually copy and paste and plagiarize when these, so I think we need to get back to the design of the assessment itself and the purpose of that assessment. Yes, these tools are available, but they are only tools. And as I said, there are numerous workarounds for each of those.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. Hilda, okay, you covered. Everyone covered, then I'm going to hand over back to Hemali for the last little bit.
All right, thank you, everyone. I think quite an engaging conversation, and I'm glad that we're going to keep this conversation going because it's a very important one. But I just want to highlight two things that were said in the chat. Sorry if we're not getting to all of your comments, but we will have an opportunity, hopefully at the end, if we have 10-15 minutes, just to quickly look at anything. But Karina said an integrated project-based assessment does not require invigilation. All depends on the nature of the assessment. And I think that's a very valuable comment. Also linking to what Marianne said about high stakes. So in Marianne's experience, Marianne said that when she had high stakes experience, the cheating was more prevalent. But when she converted the high stakes into smaller low stakes assessments, adding up to the final marks, students seemed to prefer that option, and she saw less challenges, but it was more what she said, smaller bite-sized chunks, and structure and consistency were also key. So I think there's really a lot of valuable comments and experiences shared with colleagues in the chat as well, in terms of linking to this discussion about assessment and how do we think assessment, how are we, and these are challenges that we're raising right here, are not different from what we were having before moving to a fully online remote mode of delivery. So it goes back to these age-old questions about how do we think about honesty, integrity, all of these things. And like Jackie said early on, how do we sort of also practice it in the way in which we create these spaces of honesty and integrity in our learning and teaching spaces. So I'm gonna move on to the last bit, which is our way forward, and hopefully do it a little bit as quickly as possible so that we have some opportunity to chat at the end as well. But in a way forward, I mean, it's difficult to suggest one way. So what I've sort of drawing on here is the Uga Assessment Principle that I know Kibi and colleagues from the unit with the long name put together, I think in collaboration with colleagues from CAT and perhaps other colleagues as well, is to sort of guide, and Prof. Thea shared the two links early on in her presentation, but when we get to the chats again, I'll just copy and paste the Uga assessment policy as well as this guiding document here, because they're useful, really useful resources in terms of thinking about the underpinning ideas, but also they link to valuable examples that can really think about, the numerous types of assessments that that exist and how to sort of tap into them based on your disciplinary contexts. So, I mean, I'm going to really go back now to our breakout room, our famous breakout room today, because that, I think, really gave us some sort of understanding of what some of our students may have felt to experience. We're not saying this is the case for all, but the importance of the guidance, the support, and we're not saying this is only for the case of the exams. In all assessment, environments that we create, there is a necessity for us to, communicate, keep it simple, aligned. So assessments must be aligned with learning outcomes. And I think sometimes within the online realm, we are so focused on the technology, and it's not about the technology. That, like Jackie's just said, technology is the tool that assists the process. But what are the underpinning ways? How does the pedagogy fit into this? What are those clear outcomes that students need to meet by the end of your course? And how do you use these assessments to sort of help guide our understanding if those outcomes were met? And if they were not met, where's the feedback in all this? Because feedback is key and important and sometimes left out of the process because that's where the learning really happens. And I think I jumped to feedback, which is a little bit later. But while I am talking about feedback, when you came back from the breakout room, I was going to jump into the next session and not even provide any feedback. But then hands started going up, and I tried to even though I felt terrible about what we created in terms of the breakout room. At the same time, feedback is so important. At any point that we came back, you were addressed immediately with the feedback, some sort of learning of that experience would have immediately happened. But I went into a lessons learned session and then came back to the feedback. And that's very confusing with students when we do learning and teaching in our courses. We go on to the next week or the next task or the next assessment and the feedback hasn't happened. And I know we have challenges such as large classes and marking sort of delays depending on the assessment, delay some of this feedback process. But they're really in this document that I will share in the chat a bit later, there's really nice examples of how to group feedback. So feedback doesn't need to always be individual. How do we use rubrics as a way of getting feedback to students quicker? How do we group feedback and give feedback to students as a group so they understand what the challenges are, and then help the feedback to also inform us in terms of how do we move forward and support students. Ensure that the purpose of assessments and how they contribute to achieving learning outcomes are clear to students. I mean, why are you doing the assessment? Are we just doing it for the sake of assessing, which shouldn't be the case? So what is the purpose of the assessment and how does it align back to those outcomes and help you understand where the students are meeting those? And it links back to some of the comments that were made in the chat in terms of, the social behavior, the values. Karina's comment about, how do we integrate learning through project-based learning and not necessarily the assessment, how can it be scaffolded? Are there opportunities that can be created for synchronous opportunities where collaboration can take place? So depending on your course and how much time you have teaching, 7 weeks or 14 weeks or a year-long course, how can we rethink the way in which we create some of these assessments to engage students in the learning process? Communicate clear criteria. I did not communicate any criteria. I just said that there's going to be a facilitator that's going to give you instructions. And you waited so patiently. I'm still in awe of the group that I was stuck with. No one spoke. We were all quiet. There was just one comment in the chat saying that I need to leave, but that's about it. So the importance of criteria, knowing what is required of you, because it left all of us feeling uncertain, lost, confused, and so forth. Assessment should be fair and should not disadvantage any groups of students. And I think this point, particularly in the context that we in, challenged us as in supports, as staff at within the institution, to really think about how do we break away from what we know and just sort of putting it online to rethinking, these extensions. How do we connect with the different varied time and space situations that our students are in and sort of talk to that in a way that is fair and ultimately helps the students. Flexibility we touched on, use variety of assessment methods. So, there is so many different ways that we can assess and engage students. How do you tap into this variety? And again, this document has links to really good examples of how this variety can be created. But our colleagues in the session already have shared whether they did it in low stakes examples or whether it was in the case of health sciences, there there were opportunities for synchronous and asynchronous learning taking place. So depending on your context, there is no one size fits all, as Prof. Thea mentioned. How do you adapt and pull assessments or draw on assessments in the various assessments available that actually are fit for your context, your disciplinary needs. And then do not over-assess and keep assessments simple. I think sometimes when we think online, we think innovation and we think complex. And that's a mistake that we may make, because simplicity, I mean, the biggest lesson that has come out of our experience here is that WhatsApp has been such a valuable tool. The simplest way of communicating has time and time again showed us how valuable a simplicity is, because it helps us to do what's important, that's communicate and reach out to each other and share information. And I think that's become a really clear message in our reflections as well. Then balance for formative and summative assessment. Again, this is specific to your context and based on the weightings and how that is your individual or group design structures. Apply authentic assessment that requires application. I think there was a comment about authentic assessment also in our Padlet, but also in the chat, about the importance of application. And I think it goes back to who are our students, what is are the students, what roles are they going to play in society in the future? And as much as they're here to engage with content, is it also not a space where they need to adopt and learn skills that are necessary for the world of work, whichever context that may be in, and what kind of authentic assessments can help emulate those experiences. And there are lovely examples of community-based projects and collaborative projects between students, and where this application may take place. Sorry. Ensure assessments that are right cognitive competency level. I mean, really thinking about whether it is, we work in levels, and first year it's a conversation about scaffolding and the way in which the courses are scaffolded within your departmental spaces, but also thinking about what is fit for what the student is able to do and what skill sets and criteria have you clearly communicated so that the students can complete the tasks successfully. Then feedback, which I've already touched on, is essential to learning and to facilitate learning. So it's not only about providing the feedback, but it's also how does the feedback help facilitate the learning process so the students can learn from the feedback and take it to the next assessment. And I think a huge part of online assessments, and we're talking about summative assessments, is there an opportunity to emulate or create, a sort of simulation of what they will experience during exams, and allow them to engage in an opportunity so that they understand, they can feel what it feels like to be in that setting. They can engage. They already have practiced it. And I think in the case of the Proctoria and both the Invigilator, CAT and PsyCAT and the teams that were involved directly there contacted students. They had practice runs. They were, familiar with how the setup works before they were. So they were not just thrown into the exam and expected to use the technologies for online invigilation. But there was an opportunity and a process, and the feedback from the experience as well helped facilitate the engagement in the exam period. Then maintain integrity of assessment. I mean, we've spoken at length about this in the chat, and I'm glad that the conversation is ongoing, because we had different voices coming through in terms of how is this integrity created. And we must be also very careful of starting and departing from a premise that the student's going to cheat as well. How do we then really rethink and frame the way in which we create and design these assessments, so that it doesn't become about whether we're worrying about integrity, but it actually becomes about whether our concern is where the learning is really happening, and integrity shouldn't be at the forefront. It should rather be about, are students going to learn from this assessment? Is there going to be any learning that's going to take place long term? And how does that fit into the learning and teaching experiences? And then provide guidelines on submission process. And again, I take us back to the breakaway room, because there were no guidelines whatsoever. And what does that do in terms of just throwing us off? So I will share both these documents in the chat in a moment. So the UJ Assessment Policy and the UJ Assessment Guidelines, which I think the Assessment Guidelines document is such a valuable document with lots of wonderful examples and, and the principles that I've just shared here as well outlined there. So in sort of coming to the conclusion and hopefully giving us a little bit of space and time to talk, it's all about perspective. And I'm sharing these two images that I'm taking from the Hindustan Times, where they wrote up an article about students in Hyderabad that were asked to express how they feel in the current context of COVID. And both these two pictures just resonated because they're so different. The one is about, working collectively to overcome the pandemic, and the other one communicates loneliness, being alone, isolated, while all this chaos and drama is happening around us. And that's where I want to come to. I mean, if we look at the first picture, really resonates with me, because how do we work together? And I think spaces like this, these classes that we engaging in, there's so much of learning that's happened. I mean, all of what our colleagues and we've shared together is really helping us rethink and seeing that there are other ways of doing. Is also to remember that, you don't have to do these assessments alone. The colleagues that were asking the questions about the pools that were created, there's a whole team of supports available, and I'm really apologies if I left anyone out in this, but I mean, the CAT from the Blackboard Technical, they are, you may have or may have not worked with the instructional designers at CAT, but they're there 100% advising, supporting, problem solving in terms of how we can work through or use the technology to help achieve the assessment that you want to put in place. PsyCAD, Prof. Thea and their colleagues that also gave a shout out to PsyCAD in the chat, but if you concerned about, the fact that you're going to be using the Invigilator or Proctorio and the students are anxious, if you're receiving emails, ask PsyCAD to do a session, ask students, invite students. We found it really valuable within the supports area to talk to students during exam period, and they felt so much calmer just having a voice, a place where they can ask all their questions and get answers, and felt calmer that they were not the only ones asking this question. So they felt less isolated. And Layla did, and Albin did a few sessions with us, and they were really, really nice because students really felt like they could talk. They got some really nice resources and guidelines from PsyCAD in terms of working through, the anxiety and all the challenges that they're facing. At ADC, we have teams in learning development. Guy and his team really work in terms of if you want students to think about, time management, or how do they work through or prepare for the exam period. There are loads of resources, and you can invite our colleagues to come and do sessions, to share these resources with your students, to open up and have these conversation live chats, which I thought were very valuable. And then CASD, in terms of, all the curriculum, the assessment, really thinking about whether the assignment is fitting the purpose. So here's a whole team of us. And I want to go back to that image to say, I think what the online has taught me is how visible so much has become. What was invisible prior, being in the face-to-face context, there's so much more visibility in terms of the challenges that are facing. And the one thing that we can do is work together in this, troubleshoot, problem solve, and talk to each other in order to get to these places. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to stop there and give us an opportunity. I think there's about just over 10 minutes left. And I'm going to give us an opportunity to take any question or comments. I don't know if there were any questions in the chat, but yeah, colleagues, please feel free to put up your hand or ask us anything or share anything that you may or not have the opportunity to do during the session. Right, there are a lot of comments in the chat. I'm just having a look if there aren't any questions. Okay, so it seems like they've been. Okay. All right, Prof. Thea, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we?
I see Jackie's hand is up.
Oh, sorry, Jackie. I missed your hand.
Let's hear from Jackie and then we can conclude.
Oh, thank you, Thea. Thank you, Hemali, and thank you for this really insightful presentation this morning, this masterclass. I want to maybe put a span in the works and think of how we approach the whole notion of plagiarism. At the moment, we all have the plagiarism policies. We've got committees that sit with meetings and everything like that. And there are certain consequences to students that are plagiarism through the disciplinary process. But I think what we might need to consider, because it's becoming quite widespread, maybe that's my assumption, but this whole the level of integrity or the questioning the integrity of the work of our students, that we need to put in place maybe a mechanism where students that have been identified with low-level type of plagiarism should maybe be channeled into a program or a rehabilitation session or something where they then are sensitized towards the whole notion of, you know, what is the implications of if you compromise that integrity of assessments. And I'll hold up an example. A few years ago, we had a number of students go out to Will, and some of them actually fraudulently submitted documents that they were actually attending certain schools at the time. These students were then identified, they were called out. They then had to attend certain, what we call, you know, I don't want to call it rehabilitation sessions, but they had to attend these workshops that we then developed in our faculty to then really interrogate what it means, you know, in terms of the SACE code of conduct, etc., the implications for their profession going forward. And they had to do a certain number of community hours then as a form of just acknowledging their own transgression before we actually allow them then to redo and go out again. So I think we really need to think of how we accommodate the remediation of students that have been identified as engaging in fraudulent academic activities. So there must be some channel or some something that we put in place because I don't necessarily think that the plagiarism policies at the moment address that type of intervention, you know, before that. So it would be quite useful, as we said, an additional follow-up session that we maybe can explore these type of solutions earlier on. So there is this form of remediation that is put forward where students can really, really understand what it means to be or to explicitly follow the assessment protocols in terms of the safeguarding the integrity of their assessments. Thank you. That's just a comment on the side, and maybe for future reference.
Thanks, Jackie. Hemali, thank you, colleagues, for attending. And I really want to thank my colleague Hemali for taking so much time in preparing the session. And I'm going to hand over. And let me just say thank you, Kirti, for inviting us. And thank you, Angie and Megan, for organizing it so smoothly, particularly that breakout rooms. Okay, Kirti, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Thea and Hemali. That was definitely a fantastic session. And there's obviously a need for more of these sessions. And I think the sharing has been so important, especially because assessment is so critical to the teaching and learning process. And we all have to work together. And I see that there has been an expressed need for more of these sessions, for special sessions on plagiarism. And I'm going to leave it in my able lieutenants, Angie and Megan, to get going with organizing this. But for now, I thank all of you for attending. A big round of applause to Thea and Hemali, because I think this has been so valuable. It really has been a fantastic session. I'd like to wish you all well for the rest of the day. I hope you've got lots of goodies for your new toolbox and toolkit, and look forward to having you at our next masterclass. Megan has dropped a evaluation form in the chat, but you will all receive one in the by email as well. Please can you complete this, because it enables us to plan masterclasses that are real and meaningful for our academics. But thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Have a good day and see you soon. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.